Salam and warm greetings to all of you. I want to thank you for being here today. I am pleased to see old friends from Afghanistan here. This is a blessing and a gift, especially since so many of us have been uprooted and stranded around the world in the past few years. It lifts my heart to have my mom, Azima Amidi, and my brother, Zabih, here, sharing this moment. I owe much of who I am to my mom and my late father. I also want to thank Minister Reem for her kind and generous remarks. It really touched my heart. It's immensely humbling to be recognized by Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung's Human Rights Award and to be included in the group of incredible individuals and movements from South Korea to Mexico to Pakistan to Botswana and many other countries across the world. Learning about some of them and their inspiring work was an unexpected gift that came with this recognition. In moments of darkness and difficulty, we can find hope and courage in the tireless struggle of individuals and movements for justice and dignity throughout the history and in different parts of the world. Today, I want to talk about the ongoing civic resistance of activists in Afghanistan to the worst women's rights crisis in the world, the Taliban's gender apartheid. But first, let me reflect on my long-standing relationship with the FES. In 2005, I was 18 years old when I was accepted to join Young Leaders Forum in Afghanistan, a leadership program focused on social justice and democracy set up by the FES. I still remember the day I received the acceptance call following the application and entry assessment. It was a big moment in my life. I was a young, energetic, passionate university student in Kabul, unhappy with the quality of the education and the various forms of social discriminations I faced every day. The YLF created many opportunities for learning and growth, and the relationships I formed there have sustained and nourished me for the years to come. I still remember one of the visits organized by FES to India, where I, for the first time, met young people from Nepal, Sri Lanka, and other parts of South Asia. I stayed up late at night, talking politics and singing Bollywood songs with my new friends. I was then young, or younger, and full of hope. While difficulties such as corruption and the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan had already become very apparent, 2005 was still a moment of hope for a war-weary nation. A nation that had just had its presidential elections in 2004. A brighter future for all of us, young women and men, seemed possible in our own homeland. In the following year, in 2006, I left Kabul to study in the United States and later went to UK for my master's degree. From 2011 to 2021, in the fall of Kabul, like many young Afghan professionals around me, I worked with the hope of a better future for Afghanistan and peace and prosperity for my people. I worked with the private sector, NGOs, and the Afghan government. I was willing to join any sector where there was an opportunity to be useful. I joined a group of friends, including members of YLF, to set up Afghanistan 1400, a youth political movement in 2012. Now, almost all of us from YLF and most of us from Afghanistan 1400 are outside the country. Our dreams for a democratic, equal, and peaceful Afghanistan delayed. Despite that, so many years, mistakes, and failures later, the demand for justice and the hope for a better future for my homeland is the main thread running through my life. This recognition, again from FES, comes at a very different time. And while I'm deeply honored, I also have struggled with feelings of ambivalence about awards, particularly after the fall of Kabul to Taliban in August 2021. There are two reasons for this ambivalence. Firstly, I always think of those, particularly women, far braver than me, confronting Taliban and working for change in different parts of the country, who deserve far more recognition than I do. Second, as we mark the 75th anniversary of the Universal Human Rights Declaration this year, we cannot shy away from the difficult questions of the relevance and impact of human rights movement in preventing and stopping atrocities, with the ongoing toll of conflict for civilians, and the challenges to the values of the movement, with the rise in hateful politics and polarization across the world. We must acknowledge that with conflicts and atrocities in occupied Palestinian territory, in Israel, in Afghanistan, in Sudan, in Ukraine, among other places, this is a moment of reckoning for human rights. I earlier mentioned the women who truly deserve awards and recognition. We often hear about the widespread hunger and poverty in Afghanistan, and this is true. We also hear about the systematic and widespread oppression of women by the Taliban. We hear less often about the ways in which Afghans, primarily Afghan women, are resisting the Taliban and the collectives that they have formed. These collectives are the most consistent, if not the only, civic resistance to Taliban inside the country. They are continuing to defy Taliban in face of intimidation, arrests, and torture. They do not have international funding or political support. Most of them do not have a background of activism or working for the NGOs. Most of them are also new to mobilizing and addressing the international community as an audience. Despite all of this, they have continued undeterred and have slowly expanded their membership and reach. While the future of these collectives of resistance remains very uncertain, understanding them, paying attention to them and their demands, and supporting them can keep us close to the ground in Afghanistan and keep the light on. For me personally, they are a major source of hope and motivation. But as I say this, I also am fully conscious of my own position of privilege and safety, and being mindful of the burden that I and other activists in diaspora might be putting on them. These women continue to protest Taliban in their homes or on the streets. Some of them run secret classes or schools, and some of them may have never attended a street protest, but demonstrate support and solidarity with the protesters, and participate in some other activities, such as secret gatherings to mark occasions, read poetry, or just to be together in the same space. Small in numbers, under threat from the Taliban, and often unknown or ignored by the international community, these groups continue the fight for human rights in Afghanistan when many of us are looking away. These activists continue their inspiring struggle under a regime that has erased women and girls from all aspects of public life. Afghanistan is currently the only country in the world where there is a ban on girls' access to secondary schools. In addition to discriminating against every aspect of women's rights and freedoms, Taliban are imposing a brutal crackdown on any dissent to their policies. As I speak here today, at least 4 women protesters remain in Taliban's custody. Women and men are held in Taliban's custody for demanding the right to work, for demanding the right to education, for reporting the news, or for peacefully protesting on the streets. There are ongoing enforced disappearances, illegal detentions, reports of torture, extrajudicial killings, and inhuman punishments. These are not just allegations. My colleagues in Rawadari, an organization focused on human rights in Afghanistan, have tracked, identified, and verified all these violations. They have spoken to medical staff, survivors, and their family members. We have an ongoing stream of human rights violations committed by the Taliban as their routine practice of governance. The women's rights crisis in Afghanistan and the failure of international engagement so far is a humbling reminder of the insufficiency of our existing human rights, tools, and mechanisms in face of a real crisis affecting millions of girls and women. Let's imagine the consequence of the current gender apartheid for Afghanistan and beyond 5 years from now. If the status quo continues, Afghanistan will be a country with a very small number of educated girls and women. Afghanistan will have a severe shortage of female professionals, including doctors and nurses. We will witness an ongoing exodus of educated Afghans, teachers, civil society activists, surgeons, as well as members of marginalized groups, as well as parents who want education for their daughters. Intolerance, extremism, and radicalization will grow, with shrinking space for learning and civic work. the light will go off on Afghanistan with consequences far beyond the country itself. The situation in Afghanistan seems hopeless. There is growing international frustration about Taliban's inaction and repressive policies. In moving forward and sustaining hope in this grim context, I get my cues from the women protesters and civil society activists on the ground. They are asking the international community to do more and better in several ways. One, to not recognize Taliban or normalize their brutality. Every interaction with Taliban should be seen as an opportunity to challenge their oppression and to hold them to account. Two, to say yes to and support the Afghan human rights community's concrete demands for accountability and justice through the UN and international human rights mechanisms. Three, to continue support and funding to Afghan civil society in Afghanistan and outside in their efforts to strengthen the culture of human rights and monitor the violations in Afghanistan. Four, to pressure Taliban to create conditions for public engagement at all levels through upholding the right to freedom of assembly and association, including for women. Five, to ensure public accountability on delivery of humanitarian assistance so that women are not only included among the beneficiaries, but are also consulted on the design and delivery of humanitarian aid. Six, to fully implement protection mechanisms for human rights defenders, journalists, protesters, and other at-risk groups. This also applies very specifically to Germany, as Minister Rehm also mentioned. Germany has announced a resettlement process for several categories of Afghans at risk, including human rights defenders, but the process has been slow and insufficient. People often ask me, what gives you hope? My answer is the women of my country. But even when I feel hopeless, and there are days when I do, I need to remind myself that with or without the possibility of impact, the possibility for change, the response to injustice cannot be silence and surrender. The response to injustice is struggle for justice, even if it at times seems futile. Thus, I call on all of you to not look away from the injustices and violations in Afghanistan. Your voice and solidarity can make a difference. I want to end with verses from a poem by Maulana Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi. تو مگو همه به جنگند و ز صلح من چه آید تو یکی نی هزاری تو چراغ خود برافروز. Do not say everyone is fighting, so what of my peace? You're not one, you're 1,000. Light your own lantern. Thank you.